Can I say a Happy New Year to everybody, and let's hope that 2024 is as weird as we can hope. The Aintree Spectres. Yes, this is a subject that I have presented on before, so if you could do the next slide, please. As I said, this webinar expands upon the original article that I wrote in Fortean Times. That appeared in December 2020. And subsequently in 2022, I did a presentation at Weird Weekend North. Yeah, okay, next one. Right, now what Aintree is most famous for is the Grand National. And I thought, just for a bit of fun, I would check on whether any of the horses that have won the Grand National over it's something like been over about 150 years, something like that. Whether any of them have any phenomenological or Fortean type names, and unfortunately there weren't very many. When I looked, there were only two, and both of them were a bit cryptozoological, which should probably please Richard Freeman. One in 1968 was Red Alligator, and the other one, and you're going back to 1895. Was actually the Wild Man from Borneo. So, as I say, does your horse have a ghost of a chance? I've backed a lot of horses over the years, and most of them fall at one of the fences, but I have won on occasions. I'm still upset that Andy Pandy didn't win the year that Red Rum came and won its third race, but they did. So, next slide, please. This is my overview. I always like to let people know what's going to happen in case they want to go and make a cup of tea. I'll start off by talking about how I became aware of this phenomenon that I've dubbed as being the Aintree Spectres. Then I'll move on to how I undertook the research with a call for information and testimonies. Maps are quite important, as you will see, and so I investigated some going back quite a long time. Potential explanations. This is one of the most curious pieces of research I've ever done, I will be quite honest. And as you will see at the end, and I hope this isn't a spoiler, but I can't explain it at the end of the day. But I do have a go at what is or was going on. And I've included here some suggestions received in that after either the article in Fortean Times or my presentation at Weird Weekend, I did receive or were published in Fortean Times some ideas about what might have been going on, and they're quite interesting. And then I come to some conclusions. Then before I go to Q&A, I'm going to talk about a bit of presentational prescience. More about that later. And now we will move on to the next slide, please, CJ. I became aware of the Aintree Spectres. Now, the Phantom Concorde. Now, this might seem a bit incongruous, but I'm always, I don't know if it's luck or, the trickster in the sky or whatever, but I find that there's a certain amount of happenstance in coming across, various news and information about various strange phenomena. And this was the case that I had, in that back in the day, after I'd had an article about strange stories from Southport, I was contacted by Glenn Preston, that's a pseudonym, who went on and told me about his bizarre experience, which was to do with Concorde. And then he then mentioned that there was something going on that his brother had experienced, which is the subject of today's presentation. But I thought it would be worth just talking about the Phantom Concorde for a bit, because when people talk about ghosts, they're normally assuming, or a lot of people assume, that they are the wraiths, the spirits of the dead and departed. But I'm not really sure what the spirit or the soul is of Concord. So I'll just tell you the story about it, because it's one of my top 6 weird road ghosts that I've come across during my researches. And I go back to mid-late August 1975, when Glenn Preston was 15 years of age. And he was on a weekend trip to Shropshire with his mum and his dad. And he stayed at a campsite it was either Arley or Hampton Low. He was particularly interested in seeing a locomotive at the Bewdley station, bit of a train buff, that weekend on the Severn Valley Railway. The steam train got delayed at Hampton Low station, and everyone disembarked onto the sunny platform to wait. And this included, peculiarly, a carriage full of nuns. A Spitfire aircraft flew over, and someone remarked that there was an air show, or there must be an air show nearby. Later that fine Sunday afternoon, they left for their home on Merseyside. They were perhaps 15 to 20 minutes into the journey, which places them probably north of Bridgenorth on the A442, which was the most direct route. Out in the countryside, suddenly to their left, at first it was behind a low hedge, they saw the quite unmistakable shape of Concord. What was ridiculous and remarkable was that its height, speed and angle made it appear that it had only just taken off. It was about 10 to 15 feet off the ground. And Len recalls that the undercarriage was still deployed, but accepts that his memory might have been filling gaps. But all 3 of the family commented that it was just an ordinary farmer's field that it had seemingly taken off from. Concord was parallel to them, also heading north, and about 100 yards away. Len can't remember if any noise, which would be expected if they were so close, but this might just be his memory again. The airplane disappeared from view behind hedges and trees as they continued up the road, and it was then nowhere to be seen. Len knew that they were not near any airfield and tries to rationalise the event over the years. Maybe it was an air show. The nearest major air show is Cosford, but no show in 1975. There was no show in 1975, and Concord only featured there in 1986 and 87. Maybe it was taking off from an airstrip, which was in the Severn Valley, beyond the field. But a runway to be able to take Concord would also be capable of handling a Boeing 747 jumbo jet. No such airstrip exists. Maybe it was experiencing trouble and so was flying very low. But surely this would have made the national press. Maybe it was something else altogether, but Len has no doubt it was unmistakably a Concorde. Therefore, this episode must be filed as both strange and unsolved. Thank you. So next slide, please, CJ. So how I became aware, the second bit is that I was talking to them, liaising with him about his story, when he told me about bizarre and frightening events that had happened over a number of years outside the village of Aintree, which is in the Mersey borough of Sefton, not Liverpool. It's on the border, but it's just over the border into Sefton. Right. Now, this is, there are 2 slides. I'll describe this first one, but I'll just say that the following slide actually it goes in a bit more closely. But what you'll notice is that there are 2 blue lines, one that loops around from the middle left and then goes all the way around past Radica at the top, is actually the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. And then going from the top left down to the bottom right is the River Alt. So the village of Aintree is, well, where you see the red marker on Bullbridge Lane. And the road crosses the River Alt at Bullbridge, hence the name, and goes into Spencer's Lane. And it is the field to the right, which is bordered by Spencer's Lane, the River Alt, and the canal. This is the one in question. In the original times, the M57 was not there. That's a comparatively recent development. But by pure coincidence, if you look below the red blob in the middle, you'll see there is a pub called the Blue Anchor. And for me, this is quite a bit of a coincidence, because it's the pub where I was when my work colleague told me all about his first-hand real-life experience of a phantom hitchhiker, which led me to the Old Man of Hasselmoss and started me on my researches into phantom hitchhikers and road ghosts. So, next slide, please.
Rob, just one pause for a second. Can anybody else hear slight feedback when Rob is speaking?
No, it's perfect here.
Okay, cool. In that case, it's probably mine. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure it wasn't a general problem. Okay.
Okay.
Yep, all good.
Okay. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is a closer in view where you can see the River Alt, the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, and Spencer's Lane. And that area there, the length of the field is approximately 700 metres, with its width ranging from 200 metres to 360 at its widest. So it's quite a big field, as you can tell. Next slide, please. Okay. This is the view from Bull Bridge, which is over the River Alt. And the field in question is the one to the left. So you can see it's a very big open area. And when you go over the bridge, there is a little turning to the right, which takes you into the field. So this gives you a feel for what is actually present there. I recorded the testimonies from Glenn and his family, and to see if there were other witnesses, I had what I always call a call piece published in the Aintree and Melling issue of the Champion newspaper on the 14th of November 2018. Responses included people saying that the field was the site of a fatal air crash on Grand National Day in 1964. The journalist and broadcaster Nancy Spain and Joan Werner Laurie, the editor of She magazine, were both killed. However, I drew one related story, which I will come to. Firstly, Glenn's older brother, Jeff, who was in his late teens, missed the last bus home one early autumn evening or night rather, I should say, in either 1967 or 68. He was walking over Bull Bridge, heading for the family home on Spencer's Lane. It was between 11 and 11:30, and the night was clear. And as I say, this was before the M57 motorway was built, with that stretch opening around about 1972. And there was no street lighting. Therefore, there was total darkness. It was at this point that Jeff noticed lights to the right of him, about 150 yards away in the field. What he saw was a group of up to 9 men carrying bright, burning torches walking along the bank of the River Alt, heading away from him, southeast towards Fazakerley. They were wearing greyish robes with pointed hoods, similar in shape to those worn by the Ku Klux Klan, and marching 2 or 3 abreast in line, like soldiers. Understandably, Jeff was frightened and ran to his home, where he got his father out of bed. They went to the upstairs back bedroom window and could see still the torch-lit procession over the fields. Jeff was very scared, mainly because he didn't know who or what the procession was, and decided to sleep on his parents' bedroom floor. Glenn then tells about their parents, now deceased, driving home from Fazakerley around 9:30 to 10 o'clock one October-November night in the early 70s. their father who collected their mother from bingo. They crossed Bull Bridge and saw in the same field to their right a dozen or so men holding bright burning torches and wearing robes, some with pointed hoods. They were standing in a circle as if they were involved in some magical gathering. The parents didn't stop to look, but saw the group clearly through the car windows. It was fully dark at that time, and the father related later that it would have been impossible for the group not to have been seen by the many dozens of people who used the road. Despite this, his inquiries over the next few days as to whether or not anyone else had seen the group was met with blank looks. He wondered if perhaps this had been some sort of Halloween event, but seemed to think that it was too early or too late for this. He'd quite expected it to be the talk of the village and was perplexed by the fact that seemingly no one else had seen it. Quite by chance, some time later, and unprompted by Glenn, the father of one of his friends, who was a security guard at the BICC works in Melling, told him of seeing the same or similar event whilst travelling that stretch of road on his moped during the early hours. Now, these events could be dismissed as nothing more than observations of a group of people with lighted torches and robes messing about in a field. However, in the late 1980s, the father was chatting to an old friend of his over a drink in the Horse and Jockey pub in Melling. His friend had long since emigrated to Canada, but was back in the country revisiting friends and family. The conversation turned to the subject of the supernatural, and so the father started to relate his sighting of the group with torches and robes. But before he got very far, his old friend interjected, saying that he knew exactly what he was going to say he had seen. He then related how he had seen exactly the same sight while cycling back from a dance late one night, but he'd observed the event from the Leeds-Liverpool Canal on the other side of the field. Significantly, the time when he had seen the lighted torch-bearing group had occurred during the early stages of World War II, when strict blackout procedures were in force, which was well over 40 years previously. The one response that I got from my call was from a Mrs. H. Her testimony was as follows. It was about 7 p.m. one evening around Christmas 40 or so years ago, which would place it in the mid to late 1970s. I was in our car with my husband and young daughter travelling back to our home in Melling, having been to see my mother-in-law in the Fazakerley area. It was very dark and it was misty. We crossed Bull Bridge onto Spencer's Lane when immediately to our left and close to the road, we saw a group of people all dressed in light outfits that looked like those worn by the Ku Klux Klan. There were about half a dozen of them, although it might have been as few as 4 or as many as 8. It was difficult to judge in the circumstances, and given that we passed them at the normal driving speed of about 30 miles an hour. Their appearance was very scary and a bit spooky, and they looked as though they were getting ready to do something. My immediate reaction was, what are they up to? None of them appeared to be carrying anything, and there was definitely no lights or torches. Naturally, we didn't stop to investigate as we were very, very frightened. I'm a lifelong resident of Melling. I was in my 30s at the time. I have seen nothing like what we saw that night before or since. My husband, now deceased, and I never forgot this experience and talked about it on many occasions, although we never heard of anyone else having the same or similar experience. That there is a series of events of apparently the same phenomenon taking place in the same location over a long period is definitely strange. Several witnesses naturally inferred a paranormal source, but what is striking is how long Jeff Preston saw the spectres for on the night in question. Jeff's running maybe the best part of 700 metres home, waking his father, and both of them then watching the procession will have involved many minutes. paranormal events tend to be quite transient and short. The fact that the spectres all behave like people dressed up, rather than performing fantastical feats or fading from sight in some ghostly way, suggests a flesh and blood explanation. But given that the field is so large and open, and close to a busy road and housing, any group of people undertaking the activities described should expect to be readily observed and challenged, not least by the police and or the farmer who uses the field. If it were some clandestine or magical group, then how did the participants get there? As in none of the events described was there reference to a series of cars parked up at the side of the road by the field. If any group was undertaking some magical practices, then there must be something particular and special about the field for them to A, keep returning, and B, place themselves at risk of observation. To investigate if there was some past presence on the field, I studied available maps at Liverpool Central Library. Historically, the core of Aintree was a small linear settlement to the east of the centre of the current township, heading up Ballbridge Lane, i.e. towards and close to the field in question. In all the maps back to 1786, the field is simply farmland. The Hennet map that you can see from 1830 shows a mill on the River Alt. You will note that the River Alt meandered quite a lot at that time. It has since been straightened to what it is now. The map also marks a chapel on the far left of the crossroads, which is approximately 200 metres up from Bull Bridge. Apparently, this was a Methodist chapel, and comparing maps, the chapel was built between 1818 and 1830, which means that it is not historic. In 1847 to 49, Carhouse Farm is in the middle of the field, and chapel cottages are seen where the chapel was recorded previously. Looking at current maps, it appears that the works building near to the motorway is on the site of Carhouse Farm, and the road to it follows the original farm road. One of the things that all of you will have noticed over on the right-hand side of this slide is that there is a Hob Lane. This no longer exists and is subsumed within Kirby. The canal itself was begun in 1770. A local farmer told me that the field is good farming land, which was part of Lord Sefton's estate, which was sold off in the 1950s or 60s for building houses. But as it is on a floodplain, it is unlikely that building will ever take place. Consequently, the land is farmed by tenant farmers. So there has never been anything special historically about the field, like a medieval monastery or whatever that might attract a magical group. I asked the farmer if he or anyone he knows had witnessed any spectres. He said his family had been in the area since 1933 and has been around for over 60 years and knows a lot of people. He has never seen anything or known anyone who has seen anything, but he has heard rumours at times. And then via an intermediary, I also contacted the current owners of Mill Farm, which overlooks the field from across the River Alt. They've lived there for 30 years and have never seen or heard anything which suggests that nothing similar has occurred since the late 1980s. Given the witnessed apparel and suspicions some sort of magical group might be involved, I asked my Weird Weekend North friend Steve Jones, a practicing pagan, if he was aware of any such group in the area. He posted my question on his Facebook account and that of other pagan groups. This resulted in a testimony from Mark, one of his pagan friends, which is as follows. Whilst at university in Liverpool during the mid-1980s, I was interested in spiritual things and was looking for a form of Christianity I could feel comfortable with. I dabbled with a number of opportunities, including being born again around 1985-86. However, I had reservations because it didn't feel right. And I wasn't persuaded by a Billy Graham revival meeting at Anfield in Liverpool in 1984. Nevertheless, I allowed a girl I fancied to talk me into going to a meeting of evangelicals in the sports hall out in, as he recalls, Kirby. The evangelical group appeared to have been well established for some time, reflected in the fact that it had hired a sports hall for the evening. There were lots of people there, mostly people in their 20s and 30s, although some were older. I went twice, but each occasion caused me deep disquiet. It was full-on stuff. I remember people speaking in tongues and reciting long Bible passages from memory in trance-like states. Everything, in fact, except the wrestling of snakes. As a newbie and outsider, I found that I could see no main focus. Nevertheless, it was clear that there was a secretive inner circle whose members definitely led things. What stood out for me was the treatment of a former member who had apparently gone to the dark side. I remember people being instructed not to interact with him in any way and to go to the other side of the street to ignore him, etc., as he was controlled by the devil. I found it scary when talking to people that some identify themselves as social workers, lawyers, teachers, and similar, with almost all saying that they were not from the area but had been called there by God. These people absolutely believed in the physicality of evil and the devil, and I never went back after the second visit. I asked Mark if he thought that dressing up in KKK-type clothes and parading around a field at night with burning torches might be the sort of thing that such a secretive inner circle might get up to, away from the main group. He said that the level of weirdness that he had witnessed, he guessed that this could well be the case. And it should be noted that the main sports centre in Kirby is no more than 3 miles from the field in question, less than 10 minutes drive. Following on from Mark's story, I contacted the Merseyside anti-fascist network to see if they were aware of any local right-wing Ku Klux Klan type groups that could be linked to such Christian fundamentalists. No one had heard of anything that could be related, although there were 1 or 2 inevitable speculations. The Lily-White Boys. Now, this has nothing to do with Tottenham Hotspur's double winning team of 1961. By February 2019, I felt that I had exhausted all reasonable avenues of inquiry. But by chance, in May, I read Tom Sleeman's haunted Wirral article in the Wirral Globe, my local free weekly newspaper. What caught my eye was reference to attacks vandalising graves in Ford Cemetery in Bootle, which is just over 3 miles away from Bulbridge Lane, in 1974, where witnesses described weird hooded figures in robes reminiscent of those worn by the KKK, only the hoods had bizarre, exaggerated noses made from cones of fabric stitched onto them. Tom argued that they were members of an ancient sect of druid-like warriors known as the Lily-White Boys. He also referred to other graveyard desecrations in Bootle and Birkenhead as late as 1982. The latter incident had the Lily-White Boys waving swords and chasing a couple at 1 a.m. in the morning to the girls' home in Sumner Road, which was at least a quarter of a mile away. Tom's website said says that they are a sun-worshipping cult predating Christianity, which practices animal and allegedly once child sacrifice. They're referenced in the ancient folk song called Green Growth Brushes O, with the line, two lily-white boys clothed all in green. Now, I'm hoping that this works. So that a lot of you will know the tune, even though you might not be able to think of it first. So let's see if it works.
I'll seek and one of What is your point? One is one and all along, and evermore shall be it, so I'll sing you too. Oh, green road rushes over. What is your tune? To the lily white boys, covered all in green. Oh, one is one and all alone, and evermore shall be it, so I'll sing you.
Okay, so that is an ancient song, well known. I think we probably sang it when I was at primary school all those years ago in the 19th century. Now, apparently these lily white boys have been seen for hundreds of years across the country. But on Merseyside, they congregate at specific times of year at 4 locations: Wirral's Bidston Hill, Bowring Park on the Liverpool Huyton border, Delamere Forest, and a field between Wadiker and Melling. Of course, this is the field I've been investigating. Tom describes one incident as follows. One harvest moon night in the 1970s, Brian and Tina, a young couple travelling homewards down Bulbridge Lane in Aintree, saw a circle of figures in green robes standing in a field around a bonfire. And one of the figures was holding what looked like a small doll-like effigy. Brian got out of his car near the River Alt to get a better look at the strange ceremony and asked an old passerby what was going on. "It's the lily white boys burning a child," said the oldster gravely. And he advised Brian not to go anywhere near the group, or they would kill him too. "You're joking," said Brian. "That's some Guy Fawkes thing they're burning, isn't it?" But the old man shook his head solemnly. Brian raced home and called the police, but only the charred remains of a sheep was found in the smouldering vestiges on the following day. Tom also refers to incidents in World War II. One had ARP wardens investigating a huge bonfire in Bowring Park during a blackout and being faced with green-robed men and naked women dancing around the fire, with 5 of these men wielding scythes and swords. This ties in time-wise with the experience of Glenn and Jeff's father's friend, who had emigrated to Canada. I asked Jeff and Mrs. H if these descriptions fitted with the figures they saw. Jeff didn't recall any exaggerated noses, but then the figures he saw were at a distance and heading away from him. And if the colour is a light green, then it would be quite difficult to distinguish this in the torchlight from the greyish colours that he recalls. Similarly for Mrs. H, a light green outfit could well appear white or light coloured when partly illuminated by car headlights. And travelling at 30 miles per hour, she could not recall any exaggerated noses. What is or was going on? I tried contacting Tom Sleeman via the World Globe so as to compare notes and sources and ask if he knew whether the robes were dark or light green. Unfortunately, Tom never got back to me. It's intriguing that his stories about the Lily White Boys tie in well with the first and second-hand testimonies I've collected in terms of both appearance and some of the actions. His earliest references to incidents were in World War II, and his last references were in the early 1980s, again, consistent with testimonies that I collected. It can be concluded that these spectres have been seen on several occasions from the mid to late 1960s to the mid to late 1970s, and possibly as far back as World War II, and as recent as the early 1980s. There was great consistency in where and what was witnessed, suggesting a single, if infrequent, phenomenon. Understandably, witnesses believed something paranormal or supernatural could be involved because they were so scared. But everything points to human involvement. Of course, the outfits were not necessarily Ku Klux Klan related because pointed hats of a conical form, which I think is pronounced, if you want to go to the next slide, please, capirote, if you're Spanish, and capirotes, if you're from the Black Country, are part of the uniforms of some brotherhoods during Easter observances and reenactments in some areas during Holy Week in Spain. Religious robes specific to a cult, such as the Lily White Boys, would make a lot of sense. Nevertheless, it would be imprudent to exclude the possibility that the motivation by the activities was malevolent and or political. The maps did not indicate any explicit ancient presence on the site which might attract a magical group on a recurring basis. However, a Captain Moonlight states Aintree, the word Aintree derives from the Anglo-Saxon Antreau, meaning one tree. And that one tree was an ancient sprawling oak sacred to the Druids and the Lily White Boys cult of nature worshippers. Alternatively, it might simply be that it is large, reasonably out of the way, and convenient for the participants. The timing of Mark's experiences with the Christian fundamentalists is not inconsistent with the sightings, because this would only stretch dates into the mid-1980s. But it would seem that the phenomenon had ceased since at least the late 1980s. But if it was the Lily White Boys, are they still active, or has the cult disbanded? Well, at least on Merseyside. Perhaps it simply withered on the vine as its members grew old and died, and their children or other potential members turned their backs on its continuance. I Google researched as much as I can about the Lily White Boys, and other than references to Green Grow the Rushes, though, Harry Cluckson's 1960 play of this name and a story of this title by William Maxwell, I have not been able to find anything wholly independent of Tom Sleeman's writings. Excuse me. I asked Dr. David Clark of Fortean Times and Sheffield Hallam University if he was aware of the cult through his folklore networks, and again I asked Steve Jones through his pagan contacts, but both drew a blank. Perhaps the Lily White Boys are a literary device created by Tom Sleeman to provide a backstory to actual local events or stories that he has picked up on. After all, I'm unlikely to be the only person that has witnesses who've spoken about this phenomenon. Unfortunately, as I say, Tom hasn't got back to me. Nevertheless, there seems to be a distinct possibility that some form of sect was involved, and maybe in the early 1980s, its members changed tack and followed an entryism route into the local Christian fundamentalist group for whatever reason, and were the secretive inner circle that Mark commented upon. Such a possible link would all but be pure speculation on my part. However, it is safe to say that it is highly unlikely that the Spanish Brotherhood would travel to Merseyside to practice their observances and reenactments in the middle of a farmer's field, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the winter. Next slide, please. Spectres strike again. Those of you who know me will know that I sometimes experience subtle, strange synchronicities with Fortean Times. So after chatting with David Sutton, the FT editor, about publishing my Aintree Spectres article, I opened up my newly arrived issue of Fortean Times to see reference to a 5G mast being set ablaze at Aintree near the M57 motorway. Naturally, I checked out exactly where the 5G mast was situated and found that it was on the site of the old Chapel Cottages, which is right on the opposite side of Spencer's Lane from the field where the spectres were seen brandishing their burning torches. So maybe, just maybe, it wasn't local vandals that set the mast alight, responding to coronavirus conspiracy theories. Maybe the spectres had made a belated comeback and torched it. After all, they carry the necessary tools. Next slide, please. Some suggestions. I had an email from Ryan Sherlow, who's a great guy, and he's been at Weird Weekend North and written in Fortean Times. And he emailed me saying that he kept coming back to the idea that there was some sort of military explanation, partly on the connections that he's had in the past, where junior officers and cadets at Air Force bases get completely bored and like to let off steam, sometimes by dressing up and so on. And through correspondence, we noted that it's not that far from what used to be the old USAF base at Birchwood. But maybe or maybe not. But what he does say about that was, looking at the dates, there could have been Ku Klux Klan penetration of the US military, and they would have needed a sympathetic and like-minded landowner to do their nonsense. So maybe it was local US Air Force personnel with some Ku Klux Klan people there, or maybe not. My friend Steve Jones highlighted that he'd been with Richard Freeman and people to the search out Jeff the Talking Mongoose at the Isle of Man. And while they were in the Manx Museum in Douglas, he noticed in the folklore section a small paragraph about the White Boys, accompanied by a costume and a black and white photo. It briefly said that they used to visit people's houses to beg for money. Interestingly, the costume consisted of a white robe with some coloured ribbons attached and a round white headpiece with eye holes in it. But when you analyse it, it was far more to do with mumming around the Christmas time. And then finally on this bit, there was a letter from Dean Ballinger in New Zealand, which appeared in Fortean Times, where he talks about a mysterious group called the White Boys, which is an Irish political secret society, which goes back to the 18th century, who did a lot of civil disobedience and so on and so forth. And he just wondered that with the Irish connections that there undoubtedly are in Liverpool, maybe that was something that with the Irish immigration could have been a contribution. Conclusions. Before Tom Sleeman's article, my best guess was that the Aintree Spectres were a small group of local Christian fundamentalists who enjoyed the excitement of dressing up in Ku Klux Klan type apparel and performing rituals with burning torches in the middle of the night, perhaps with some political backdrop. Pointing the finger at the Lily-White Boys, or whatever they might be called, has obvious attractions, but there are no evidential sources I could find independent of Tom's writings. But of course, there is a problem. The secret sects are, by definition, secret. Therefore, assuming that the Lily-White Boys actually exist or existed, it will be virtually impossible to confirm if they were involved, short of a member or a former member coming forward. And one point that I think I should make is that I don't think whatever was done then would happen today, simply because of the ubiquity of mobile phone cameras. As soon as anything is spotted these days, people will whip their phones out and take a video of whatever's happening. So unless someone who participated in such events or knows someone who did is prepared to make an admission, which might simply be something along the lines of, "It was me and my mates having a laugh," I will adopt a Fortean stance and keep an open mind on exactly what lies behind this very peculiar phenomenon. Presentational prescience. This is a picture, a photo of me wearing one of my Weird Weekend North t-shirts, giving my presentation about the Aintree Spectres at Weird Weekend 2022. Now, at the end of it, Jane hurried to me and asked me why I had repeated it from an earlier Weird Weekend North rather than deliver a new one. Surprise, I explained that it was the very first occasion I had ever given the talk. which perturbed her greatly. She told me she had seen me do the exact same presentation before, even down to the jokes and asides. No comments on that. I needed to make way for the next speaker, and so later when I chatted to her, she explained that she sometimes had similar inexplicable episodes, but was adamant about having seen my present Aintree Spectres in the past. Her daughter, who was with her, added that when they were outside at the break, they'd heard someone else say that they had seen me do it as well, and pointed him out. I went over to Jerry and asked him about this, and he confirmed that he believed he had also seen my talk in the past, although he described it as more a strong case of deja vu. At the lunchtime, I asked if anyone else might have had a similar experience, and lo and behold, Greg caught me on the afternoon and told me of having seen my complete presentation before, just like Jane. He'd mentioned it to his colleagues at the time, which greatly puzzled them. This is all very strange. I had never previously delivered my Aintree Spectres talk, and yet 3 people say that they had seen it. I asked if they had read my article in Fortean Times, but they were clear it had no influence. Did some sort of time slip take place, or had the COVID-19 pandemic affected some people's memories in an unknown way? It is certainly something somewhat unique for something so Fortean to take place at a Fortean event. Next slide, please, which is questions and answers. Right, thank you. I will try and answer any questions that people have.
Hi, CJ, you there? There he is.
So, first question up. I think I mentioned this last time. But it was round about the Christmas period, one of the sightings. When were the others? Is there a particular time of year associated with it?
No.
But the earliest sighting was the late 80s. Was the late 70s, 78, somewhere around?
The earliest one possibly was in World War II.
Yeah, but the earliest one that you heard about. Sorry, the first one.
Yeah, I think it was 1970s, yeah.
Right. There is a reasonable argument for which would explain it in the mid to late 80s. But going back to the 70s, it fails completely. It certainly doesn't work in World War II. In the 1960s, the band MC5 released a record called Kick Out the Jams. And that record was picked up by Rob Shea and Robert Anton Wilson for their 1981, I think, science fiction trilogy, the Illuminatus trilogy, 3 books. It's brilliant. I mean, I read it when I was 14. It had a major effect on me. But it's a kind of conspiracy theory, occult. It doesn't really make much sense. Stream of consciousness set of novels set in the real world that takes in everything from the assassination of JFK. It's basically an extraordinarily Fortean work in 3 volumes.
Mm-hmm.
But as a teenager, it had a big influence on me. It also had an influence on a couple of chaps called Drummond and McCourty, who never finished reading the book. I'm not entirely sure if I ever did either. But they also, like me, picked out the names and the images. And they picked up the fact that one of the groups in the book is called the Justified Ancients of Mumu, which is a joke about Kick Out the Jams from the 1965 record. They later on got hold of a sampler and they started to record records and hold situationist art events. They were both art students as well as being musicians, I believe, as well as being, one of them was quite prominent in the record industry. And they lived in Liverpool. And they would hold what they called situationist happenings, in which they would dress up in peculiar costumes. Now, one of their motifs is dressing up in either fisherman's gear or occasionally white robes with KKK-style hoods and holding torchlit parades, which they last did in the Wirral in 2023, as art events. And if you just Google Justified Ancients of Mumu, you'll find pictures of them. And they started to do things like hold rave parties, DJ parties with their Ford Prefect. I think it was a Ford Prefect. They called it Ford Prefect after the character. It was an ancient Ford Anglia or something like that they had, which they painted a what do you call those things that you carry around on your shoulder? They were big in the 80s, beatbox kind of thing. They painted a beatbox on a pyramid on the side of an old police car, did it up like an American police car, drove it around. Sometime in the late 80s, they had a #1 hit in the UK, having changed their name to the Time Lords. They recruited, unfortunately, Gary Glitter, and they did a song called Doctor in the TARDIS to the tune of Rock and Roll. Only they were singing Doctor Who, Doctor Who, Doctor Who. Yeah. And they decided to, after that, they took their musical career to the next level by becoming known as the KLF. And the KLF had a whole string of hits, such as What Time Is Love, 3 a.m. Eternal, and they released an album called The White Room. They had by that time they'd moved to a squat in Leytonstone, I believe, somewhere in North London. But that was in the very late 80s, early 90s that they moved to London. And they made a huge amount of money, which they won a load of musical awards, went to the Brits, fired a fake Tommy gun into the crowd, threw a bucket of fish over the music critics, deleted all their records so that they've been unavailable from then until now, and took the £1 million that they'd made out of the bank, went to a shed and filmed themselves burning it. And having burnt £1 million, and you can actually find the K Foundation, How We Burned £1 million, the remaining £80,000 they nailed to a pallet and left outside the Tate for the worst artist of the year, which they awarded to someone who'd actually had one of their works exhibited at the Tate, but who was so incredibly bad in their opinion that they desired the derision. And the artist in question took the £80,000. I'm not saying it was definitely Drummond and McCourty, but in the late 70s, early 80s, in that part of Aintree, it's worth Googling the images of the time and possibly even asking them, do you know who did this? Do you know anything about this? Because it strikes me as very much their sense of humour and extremely likely to be the kind of thing that they might have been involved with. However, at the same time, there was an active Ku Klux Klan in Wales, and there was a white nationalist movement in North Wales, and they could easily have come across. But the KLF were prone to wearing white robes. It's their stomping ground in that era, and they are, I think, the KLF stroke, also known as Justified Agents of the Movement, also known as the KLF. I think they are the kind of people who might have done it. There's a brilliant book on them. I've got no idea. It doesn't meet with any of the earlier stuff, which suggests a genuine occult connection or a supernatural connection. It's a really eerie case. I remember being quite nervous about it the first time I heard it. But you haven't been murdered by the Lily White Boys yet, so I'm
Not yet.
sorry, touch wood. So I think we can put
They're
those
in the
down.
cupboard over there.
Oh, they're waiting to leap out as soon as yeah.
I mean, if you could email me those details again, I mean, if these guys are still around, then
they're definitely still around.
I'm perfectly happy to try and contact them. I mean, if there is a response, if they did it, and
it might just be. I don't think they do it deliberately, but it could be one of their dance parties. It just sounds like, if you Google, it's Grim Up North.
Well, that's fairly commonly stated.
Yeah, it's Grim Up North YouTube. You'll find KLF, or alternatively, What Time Is Love. You'll get the idea. And it's Grim Up North is very unusual. Very unusual. I think is a fair way of putting it. You have to wait till the ending of it to understand how powerful a piece of music it actually is. But it is very, very, very. Yeah, I could share it now, actually, if you want to know a little bit about what they like. But I'm sure most people here have heard of them. Anyway, let's go over to the questions. Who's taking questions tonight? Christian, do you want to deal with the questions, or Claire?
I'm here. I'm happy for Christian to do it. Thank you so much, Rob, for a brilliant talk. That was really interesting, actually. I think you're going to have to engage your aviation geek, whether you have any aviation geek or not, later on, because some of these questions are connected to the Concorde thing.
Oh,
Well, first of all, can we
that'll
just
teach me to broaden my horizons.
be careful what you say? And thank you, CJ, so much for engaging everyone's Alexa. I've probably done it again now, haven't I? With Barry Manilow and everything. So let's have a look. Yeah, it was a really interesting talk. Kieran Farrell says he remembers Red Alligator as he used the name, but the horse didn't live up to expectations. In what way, Kieran? Just unmute yourself there. There. Oh, where's he gone?
Well, it's basically, I thought it was going to be a brilliant horse and it was going to win because I love the name. But it kind of followed it a couple of times and it didn't really do that well. So, made a bit of a fool of myself in front of some of my mates because of it. That's all.
Do you want to ask your quite technical questions here about the aviation side of it? When the Concorde was seen, etc.
Oh, yes. Basically, I just wondered, Rob, whether you knew whether the Concorde was in sort of takeoff or landing mode, where it had its sort of special sloop droop nose down, or whether it was in the sort of normal flight position, which would be straight up, not like that, like that.
That level of detail wasn't mentioned, but it was clear that they thought that it was taking off.
So it would be down then, the nose.
I can only presume so, but when you had mother, father, and son, teenage son, who were adamant that they were seeing Concorde, which
sure.
by all means everybody reckons that it's one of the most distinctive airplane shapes ever. And I remember when I did mention this at one of my previous Weird Weekend Norths, when I was talking about phenomena across Merseyside. And one of the audience, who was from Lapis, I think, was saying, no, this must have been this, that, or the other. But actually, Glenn was in the audience, and he revealed himself, as it were, and said, no, it was Concorde, no messing, it was... He was adamant, absolutely adamant.
Thanks. It was really just a technical point because, like you say, the witnesses considered it was just kind of the Concorde was taking off. Yeah. So in which case that implies that the nose should be in that position. The reason why they designed it in that way was to ensure that it had a higher amount of lift in taking off and landing, because it was designed as a supersonic airliner. And if you have too much lift, that can be a problem when you get up to very high speeds. Right. So it's a mechanism similar to flaps, really, but just applied to the nose of the aircraft as well as the wings. I think Stu wants to come in with something on this. Stu?
Yes, I do. Basically, I can answer a lot of Concorde questions. My dad was one of the chief fuel engineers on it in Filton in Bristol. So I grew up kind of looking at Concorde and at Vulcans as well. They went from Vulcans to Concorde because obviously one basically informed the other to a very big degree. One thing I will say about Concorde, if it was in flight position, it had to have been at least 400 or 500 feet because the snoot, as was said, the snoot was down, not just for the drag, but also so it could actually see the ground. When it was coming in, if the snout was straight out, you couldn't see the ground from the cockpit. Whereas if the snoot was down, they could see the runway. That's the other thing about it. But also, if it was at that height, you bloody hear it. You'd hear it from miles around. You know what I mean? One possibility, however, and this has been raised a few times as possible triangular UFO reports, is a solid dirigible, which the US Air Force has apparently been working on. And they are very delta-shaped, but obviously pretty much silent. And they can hover at a very, very low altitude. And that's a possibility because in profile, it would look a great deal like Concorde or a Vulcan.
Yeah, you're talking about 1975.
Yeah, it goes way back. They've been sort of, right. If you think the Belgian UFO flat, they've been going, I mean, they was mostly early 80s, weren't they? But they've been seen before that. Certainly in the US Midwest, there have been triangular sightings going back right to sort of 60s. because Lockheed were developing Delta wings, but they dropped them quite early. But it looks like they certainly have been using dirigibles, solid dirigibles, because obviously they have buoyancy, so you don't need the same degree of fuel to get them off the ground. So they can't go as fast, but they're bloody quiet. So that's a possibility.
But I play devil's advocate here as well and say that our own Bill Eyre has asked if the image of what you thought was Concorde could have been a Vulcan. As
They're
that
bloody noisier than Concorde. Vulcans are noisier than Concorde. You'd have heard the bugger.
all I can say is that, having had many conversations with Glenn and with him being prepared to stand up at Weird Weekend North that year, he and his family were adamant. And you're talking about witnesses' perception. I wasn't there. You can only go by what people say. Although you can accept that maybe if it was an aircraft of similar shape or whatever, there could be that. But the issue still remains, even if it was, say, a Vulcan, for argument's sake, was there was no airstrip there. It was 100 yards away from them, and it was around about 10, 15 feet. So
they need a 2 mile airstrip. So Heathrow could take it. Filton and Wharton were the only places that could take it.
Yeah. So I mean, so it's just weird. But there you go. Life is full of inexplicables. That's what keeps ASSAP going, isn't it?
No, don't doubt it happened. It's when people say stuff, you never doubt that they saw it. It's just what the bloody hell was it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, nice one.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kieran and Stu, for that. Stu, you also said the KLF, which Christian was just talking about, did wear white robes for a long time.
They did, yeah. It's part of the thing. If you look at the video for Last Train for Trans Central, they're on a big platform stage, pyramid stage at the end, all of them in kind of Ku Klux Klan white robes. So yeah, I mean, the £1 million burning thing that CJ mentioned, if you read John Higgs' book, John Higgs wrote a fabulous book about the KLF, including all the Discordianism and Robert Anton Wilson, stuff like that, and their roots. And there's a documentary was done on Channel 4 some years ago where a forensic guy watched it. He reckons it was probably about 50,000 quid that they actually burnt. And the rest of it, but who can tell? It's the KLF. They might have actually done it. It's equally likely they walked off with 950 grand and just burned 50 of it, And apparently, the last thing I heard, they were on the radio just before Christmas, and they're going to set up an old people's home. Apparently, by all means, look that up. I'm not making that up. By all means, look it up.
I'm going to bring Dave Sevier in a minute because he has some input on it. But am I misremembering, or is it the KLF that released the song with Tammy Wynette? Justified and Ancients. That's really stuck in my head now. Dave, you wanted to talk about Rachel Whitehead. Good evening, David. How are you?
Yeah, Rachel Whitehead. Yes, she was the She was the artist who they nominated as being the worst artist to get the Turner Prize that year, and they awarded her the money. For they set up for worst artist, and she got a bit annoyed because she didn't like her art being dissed. I mean, I think what she did was she filled her house, which was due to be condemned, with concrete, and then took the house apart, leaving this sort of like three-dimensional internal impression of what it was like. Anyway, she went to see her lawyers about it because it was a terrible, terrible slight, and they said, take the money and run. So she took the money, but read out a prepared statement saying that she didn't really agree with it.
Wow. Well, they say art is subjective anyway. Very subjective. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for that, Dave.
Yes.
Let's have a look. Is there, and Robert, you there? Robert Stenton?
Just before we go on, in response to the forensic claims that they didn't burn the money, they only burned 50 grand. They actually did go to the trouble of having it delivered by the bank. So if there was any dodginess, it would have been on their part. I'm pretty sure of that. But the major reason I believe they actually burnt it was that they had the receipts from the bank for the withdrawal of £1 million, which is all part of the actual documentary, How We Burnt £1 Million. their manager wrote down the serial numbers so that subsequently they could have gone to the Bank of England and requested the money back, and they never did.
Okay.
They refused to as a principle. Burning money was something that I'd experimented with in the 80s. Somebody discussed to everybody around me by saying, well, maybe we should just burn money because it's the last totemic, chain against us. If we destroy the means of capitalism by burning the money, that will help overthrow the state faster. But none of my fellow revolutionaries were up for it at that point.
Mm-hmm.
However, what was the case very much was, they definitely did burn a lot of money. And the reason I believe it is because they were dirt poor afterwards for a while. I mean, they were not wealthy people. So if they certainly didn't spend the money on themselves, put it that way, whatever happened to it. Interesting bunch.
I just put a link into the Guardian story about the old folks home. Perhaps that's where it went. I totally want making it up. I was just giving you a link.
Yeah. Well, I mean, last year they did their weird 2023 thing, didn't they? Because they said they were going to leave pop music for 23 years after the millennium, their 1997 thing, which was We Want It Now, which was when it was a kind of anti-millennial campaign, and they're currently campaigning to raise money to build a people's pyramid. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure what that is about, but this is the KLF. Nothing about them makes much sense, really.
So the old folks' home, did they actually do that? They actually built that?
No, well, they said they were going to, but they said they're going to do a lot of things. That's the thing. It's the KLF. You did the way, as I'm sure CJ would agree. The thing with the KLF is they say they're going to do stuff, and then sometimes they actually do bloody do it, and that's their great shtick. You cannot tell. You can't
tell if they mean it or not. And the top stuff Day of the Dead, as Jim Martin just said, happens every year now since 2023. Well, it happened last year, and that involves a lot of burning torches. And I mean, they are performance artists, stroke ritual magicians, stroke situationist anarchists, stroke whatever you want to call them. Really, they're an interesting bunch of people.
Thank you. And then Martin adds in, the KLF members still organise the annual Toxic Day of the Dead in Liverpool, as far as I know. And there's also been a documentary in the last few years called Who Killed the KLF? My goodness, I just thought they released a catchy tune with Tammy Wynette, which I was impressed enough about. Wow, there's a lot more to it than that. Martin, you want to expand on that at all? Are you there, Martin? You can unmute yourself. Hi, Martin.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi. I watched the documentary. I think it's by Chris Atkins called "Who Killed the KLF," and they go into the story of the KLF. I think it's actually based on the book that CJ mentioned. But it's a really interesting documentary. I think they showed the group wearing the people they hired anyway. In kind of a cultish, kind of like cultish dress, a bit like the ones we've been seeing with kind of KKK style outfits. And there's also on the main quid burning as well. Sorry, I've just gone up the stairs and I'm a bit out of breath. But it's a really interesting documentary.
No, that's great.
While we're here, and we're talking about their music, let's go for something that isn't catchy. I will, if I can get this to work, play you a tiny bit just so you can see what their music is like. This is not typical, I guess. Hang on.
A CRM shouldn't weigh your butt.
Right, so first up, I need to share screen. Then I need to... how do I do this bit? I go to here and I share sound.
Yeah.
And then I go back to new share. Where is it? This is just a tiny bit of them to give you an idea of what they're like. Oh, end of slideshow. No, I've gone back to the slideshow. New share. Stop share. Okay, try that one more time.
Budget down. It should lift your teams up. A CRM shouldn't hide.
I'm going to skip a part of it, so you don't have to explain. Videos. Here we go. Oh, that's Top of the Pops version. There's the. Yeah, here we go. You see that, Rob? I can't find it. Never mind.
You do your
thing,
and you do it well.
Turn this off. Stop sharing. But basically, at the end of that, how do I stop sharing? Have I stopped?
Yeah, that's okay. You're back on the main screen.
Yeah, so basically they're just playing a dance beat and listing northern towns. The bit is, at the end, the last minute and a half of it, they go into Jerusalem by William Blake. And it goes into a full choral version of Jerusalem, beautifully done with synths. And it ends with amongst these dark satanic mills. And it's a comment on the north of England, which is where they're both from. So as pop music, it was a brilliant attempt to lose money and to piss off their fans, which was generally their plan throughout their entirety of their career. And when they were at the height of their artistic credibility, they recorded a song with Tammy Wynette and an ice cream van, which is actually much, much more listenable and Claire actually likes. But these are the kind of people who are messing around in the occult and anarchist space in Liverpool in the 80s, early 80s, late 70s. One of them was in a band with Julian Cope. He was in The Teardrop Explodes. And he wrote a book on stone circles and megaliths, which I've never read, but which I'm told is quite entertaining, if not entirely accurate. It's very, very well done.
Very Julian Cope. It's the modern antiquarian or something, isn't it? I think
that's right. Yeah, have you read it,
yeah.
Stuart?
When it came out, so 25 years or so ago now. It was well back in the 90s, wasn't it? Yeah. I read it back then. It was good. It was engaging. It's well written, but you do look at it and think, where are you going, mate? You know, he does have his own ideas. It's kind of Hillary Evans on acid, though I hate to say it that way.
Hillary Evans on acid sounds kind of interesting.
Oh, it's interesting, yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. It was just one idea that I thought was worth pursuing. What do you think?
Rob, what's your interpretation of what's been happening at Aintree?
Me?
Yeah. If you had to be, nailed down to something. Why that area? What's happening?
Well, that was the thing that when I looked into it, I wondered if there was something particular about that strip of land that had some, I don't know, spiritual or whatever meaning or history, and there was none. Absolutely not. And what puzzles me the most is that it's the sort of activity that would have been seen in theory, by lots and lots of people. And the police, it's a main road. It's not like the main Southport to Liverpool road or anything like that, but it's still a major road with a lot of traffic. And it just dumbfounds me to a large extent as to why people, if you were going to do something, why would you do it in such an open area where you can't necessarily easily escape from and where you'd easily be spotted? And, what bit odd that the police never, unless it was a load of policemen doing it,
I wondered, actually.
They were waving their truncheons about. I don't know.
Rob, you mentioned the 1964 plane crash, yeah?
Yeah.
That was at Melling, according to the accident report, but I didn't realise that Melling covers the whole area, so it could very well have been in the field. It was cabbages.
It was that field, apparently.
Right, yeah, there were cabbages in it at the time when the crash occurred.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very big field.
Could somebody have, the weird thing about the plane crash is nobody ever found out what happened, but two of the women in it, Nancy Spain, who my parents both liked her. She seems to have been a racing commentator, stroke sports commentator. And she was a very famous lesbian of the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s and 70s, or 50s and 60s. She died. But after the war, she was proudly out and living with her girlfriend at a time when that was uncommon. But it really didn't raise any hackles in my parents at all. They weren't bothered by it. She seems to have been fully accepted, which I think we tend to forget now, is that gay people openly did live in the entertainment business back then.
Oh.
But I just wondered if the crash in 64 with police torches at night and people standing around could have replayed itself. But no, it's too definite, isn't it?
No.
Yeah, and Hobbs Lane.
I did get a response from, which I didn't include in the articles, from a guy who claims to be psychic, who reckoned that there was something to do, whether it might be to do with the crash, but
it seems unlikely.
Yeah.
The only reason I thought of that is if you imagine people in white forensic paper overalls. But would they have used those then? They wouldn't have done, would they? Not in 60s.
No. There are newspaper articles which shows people, officials around the plane crash, investigating it. And,
so Nigel has brought up an interesting possibility based on Hobbs Lane. Go for it, Nigel.
There's the old TV series where the situation, the underground station where the Quatermaster pit is called Hobbs Lane.
Yeah.
which they said is an old name for the devil.
Yeah. But I mean, the Hob Lane in Kirby, I say it still technically exists as a kind of walkway. It's as if whoever was rebuilding Kirby didn't want to let go of such a tricky name. But Kirby was built after World War II, with a lot of people from Scotland Road being moved out there when they were doing the slum clearance in Liverpool. And so Hob Lane, that map goes back to the 19th century. And I mean, the thought is that big lanes like Hob Lane, as it was, why was it called that? It suggests that there was some folkloric or supernatural reason for it getting that sort of name, which should be lost in the mists of time. And so maybe that the Liverpool Leeds Canal was built, as I say, whichever year it was. So Hob Lane and that field would have pretty well run into each other, before the canal was built or dug, or however you describe it. But that's just, it's clutching at straws in many ways. It's one of the strangest things that I've looked into, because I don't necessarily feel that there is a supernatural explanation. To me, it's some people doing something which might have been for ritualistic reasons. But I don't know why they would do it there, why they would do it in such a way that they would be observed. The very first case that I was told about with Jeff, they must have been in that field for over half an hour minimum, probably a lot longer.
It's really weird, isn't it? What's the field name? Have we ever? Is there a historic name for the field? Do we know?
No, not I'm aware of. I mean, as it says, it's floodplain. I mean, I spoke to the farmer, and it's just a field, which is good farming land. I mean, it's not much good for anything else.
That is it's such an odd and eerie case. Well, thank you ever so much.
No problem. I'm glad to start the year with it if you wanted it. Yeah.
Well,